Our touchdown point had been near the smoother north pole of the asteroid. We could not land on the pole itself as that spot had been converted into a large hatch. When I say large, I really mean gigantic. It was probably one of the largest hatches ever made with a span of approximately 500 meters across. Inside the pressurized pressure hatch, not a typo, as the hatch was an inflated oblate spheroid to save mass, was the shipyard cavity where Gambado, humanity's next interstellar escape craft, was being constructed. Instead, we were now located 1.5 kilometers outward from the center of that hatch. Aside from our landing terminal, there were dozens of other surface structures located at this same radius, forming a ring around the central hatch. The reason for their placement being that they matched the diameter of the circular gravity train tunnel buried a few kilometers below. The gravity train habitat being the primary living spaces for almost the asteroid's entire human population. Our airlock linked with that of the landing terminal, and there was a noticeable hiss as the pod's pressure dropped to match the current atmosphere of the terminal. Omu said that we would be breathing an increased concentration of oxygen to compensate for the lower pressure. Our shells were more tolerant of the reduced pressure, with less chances of edema or other medical issues arising. The airlock opened and Sova and I pulled ourselves out of the shuttle pod. The very light local gravity was nowhere near strong enough for us to walk or bunny hop like on the moon. Here on Vesta, if you fell from a 1-meter height, it would take almost 3 seconds to hit the floor. So our movements were mostly made by pulling ourselves from handhold to handhold. There were only 2 people waiting for us in the arrival and departure terminal. My Iris's chrono display showed that the local time was 3:40, which was the middle of the asteroid's late night period. One of the 2 waiting was Uxie in her shorter, older shell. The other was a male who embraced Sova. I pulled myself to Uxie, who wrapped her arms around me and gave me a long hug. We eventually broke apart and stood there, sizing each other up. Something about her shell bothered me slightly. Something about its proportions. I brushed those thoughts aside when I saw her grinning at me. "Oh, John, how I have missed you. You look great in your new shell, by the way," she said. Omu must have warned her that I'd taken a new shell. "I've missed you also, Ux. I like your shorter shell, but I have to admit that I am surprised you went back to a smaller one after how you had been brought up." I was referring to her childhood almost 200 years ago, when the master AI had custom-made her to have the adult body of a preteen. "Well, I spend so much time in micro-G that having a short, compact body helps me move more freely," she explained. She then broke away from me and gave Omu a hug. When they broke apart, I had to laugh when Uxa ogled a bit at the android's new larger breasts. I just shrugged when she looked at me questioningly. Next, Sova introduced me to Bale, her roommate and maybe partner. He was a first-timer who specialized in metallurgy and welding. Sova had told me back on Prancer that they had been off and on partners for almost a decade, and that her vacation to Earth had been their first real, long-term separation in that time. This meant that she was unsure of what their status would be upon her return. She had not expected any issues, but you never knew how spending a year or 2 apart would change things. She might return to find they were simply roommates again, and not the lovers as she hoped. Uxa already knew Sova and Bale, so she mostly stood aside while I was both introduced to Bale and then made my goodbyes to Sova. I was brief with both, as I could tell they were both eager to talk privately and begin their reacquaintance. I could tell by the twinkle in her eye that things were looking promising so far, at least from her perspective. She had admitted that if they decided to stay together, there might be children in the near future. Uxa, Omu, and I took a nearby mag lift down to the gravity train level, leaving Sova and Bale to their discussion. While we were descending in the lift, Ux and I began to update each other on our separate lives. The first and most important item was news on how our mutual children, the twins Alec and Kella, were doing. I learned that my son Alec was on the Earth and was back teaching self-reliance and self-defense. He had rediscovered and mastered most of the lost martial arts over the past century and had even created a new one based upon the best of them all. This new one included forms for low and zero G and had to be taught in one of the orbital stations. We were interrupted by the lift arriving at the gravity train level. Ux led while Omu assisted moving me out into the corridor in the faint gravity. We continued our discussion as we proceeded down the corridor. I learned that my daughter Keela was more of a concern to Ux than Alec. She had been one of the original creators of the artificial reality which we had built in order to contain, and hopefully fool, any arriving assemblage digital presences. After a century-long sabbatical to become a mother and travel the real world, Kayla had returned to the simulated reality project. Worse, she had set her digital clock to experience that world at a snail's pace. Or to explain it more simply, she was living slow while the years of the real world passed her by. Ux was not sure if Kayla was doing so to stay fresh for when the artificial reality was needed for the expected enemy agents, or just because she was bored with living. Ux dumped the problem of Kayla into my lap. I was instructed to spend time in that virtual world when I returned to Earth and try to talk some sense into our daughter. If anything, I was to at least find out her state of mind. After we finished discussing our kids, Ux skimmed what she had been doing over the past century. Mostly, this involved her work in various advanced sciences. I was not surprised to learn that she had not had any additional children since our twins. She had always been focused on her work, and I had been the primary parent involved with our kids when we had been together. I don't mean that she had been a bad parent. She had done a better job than I had when I had had my first career and daughter. She just got distracted at times. I made sure the kids knew how important their mom's work was. Our ages at the time had reinforced this. I was the age of a grandpa and had already seen what a career did to a parent. But Ux was fresh and in her prime. Next, we moved on to my recent life. I just covered the basics, and Ux knew me well enough to know that she could not push me for more until I was ready to share. Finally, we reached a natural pause in our conversation. After studying me for a moment, she said, "You look like hell, John. The torch trip must have been wearing. Do you want to rest for a while?" I was tired. Despite only being awake for the past 6 hours, the high G trip had exhausted me. I told her I could use a nap. She asked me if I was up for a nap in the full gravity of her quarters, or if we should instead find a low-gravity apartment nearby. "Let's continue on to your place," I said after thinking about it briefly. As much as the low gravity would allow my body to heal faster, I slept better in gravity. Ohamu guided me to a stop as we arrived at the subway terminal. I shook my head at the phrase. We were hundreds of millions of kilometers out in space, and we still needed to use the subway to get to Yuxi's home. The terminal we arrived in was occupied by about a dozen other tired-looking humans who were waiting zombie-like for the next subway train. That train had gone shooting by at nearly 300 kilometers per hour just as we entered. In a couple minutes, it would be back around and stopping at our terminal. The others here had not even looked up or come out of virtuality when the cars had shot past. Finally, it was back and slowing to a stop next to our waiting area. The train tunnel was in full vacuum, which meant there was an airlock to pass through to go aboard. We lined up in single file to pass through the narrow opening hatch. When it was my turn, Omu pulled me through and helped me to the aft end of the subway car, where Uxu was already settling herself into a very basic gravity couch. The couches were mounted one above the other, and I took the lower while she pulled herself into the upper. Omu simply stood ahead of us and gripped an overhead handhold. Soon the airlock had sealed and the car began moving. It was a maglev, so all I heard was a gentle, steady hum as the acceleration grew, pressing me back and into the padded seat. The track we were on was a perfect circle and had a diameter of 3 kilometers. As we continued accelerating, I saw a second subway train pass by in a blur. That train was on its own set of tracks and was decelerating to stop at another terminal. As our speed increased and the G-forces built up, our couches swiveled around their long axis, so the previous outward side of the car became our new down. As the sense of gravity grew, our car's curving course became a never-ending hill which needed to be climbed. I felt heavier and heavier as the car neared its full speed of 600 kilometers per hour. Now, in this orientation, my rotated couch appeared to be beside Ux's instead of below it. The previous inner wall of the subway car was now the new up. The windows on that side now looked like skylights, and through them, I could see the constantly circling mass of the gravity train directly overhead. The gravity train was the main living habitat on the asteroid. It was a series of train car modules which filled the round 20-meter diameter tunnel. The tunnel itself was a continuous loop that curved around, forming a perfect 3-kilometer diameter track. The magnetic track on the tunnel's outer wall was over 9 kilometers long. The gravity train filled all of the tunnel with its tail meeting its head. Each car of the train was circular in cross-section, with 5 levels filling nearly the full diameter of the tunnel. The middle 2 levels were the largest, with an upper curved roof level being mostly corridors for transport, and the lower 2 levels for utilities and additional transport corridors. Still, just the middle 2 levels each represented over 150,000 square meters of living space. Some of the train was not yet fully constructed, with about 2/3 still just a shell and open to the vacuum of the torus. Still, there were over 200,000 square meters of living space in the 3-kilometer-long segment currently finished and habitable. With the train's constant 600 kilometers per hour rotation, the entire area had a perceived gravity of nearly 1 full Earth G. The large diameter of the train's course virtually eliminated any noticeable Coriolis effects. The exceptions to this were the 2 small train-within-a-train transport shuttles, which ran on narrow interior tubeways on the top and bottom decks of the overall gravity train. The top shuttle would take you ahead in the direction of the gravity train's rotation. This would make you feel heavier as its motion added to the train's motion. This was the heavy shuttle. The other, lower-deck shuttle went in the opposite direction. That shuttle was known as a light shuttle due to its localized lessening of the overall gravity train speed and resulting felt centrifugal force. Our subway car finally matched the speed of the gravity train and was lifted upwards and docked inside a well in the larger train. After the seal integrity was confirmed and the airlock's doors opened, we climbed out of our couches and walked off. Thanks to the AI-controlled magnetic levitation, the gravity felt Earth normal, and the ride was perfectly smooth with no noise or vibration. Outside the subway docking area was a narrow corridor leading fore and aft. Ch.16 said her quarters were just a half-kilometer away in the aft direction. Thankfully, instead of walking or taking the light pod, there were also small automated wheeled carts for us to ride. The carts resembled the segways from the old era, but were fully automated and more stable. The ride was exciting, and I was glad the cart was automated, as the corridor was very narrow. We also had to slow and wait at the periodic wider sections for oncoming traffic more than once. We even passed through A Park, which was a 100-meter-long green space filled with trees and plants. The outer train walls of the park were full projections, which made the small bit of nature seem boundless. It was currently nighttime in the park, and my irises switched to enhancement mode. We also slowed to a crawl as there was an assortment of small animals living in the park, which we did not want to injure. Despite the pauses, the ride to where Ch lived only took a few minutes. Once there, we climbed a stairwell up to the 3rd level and found the entry to Ch's suite of rooms. "Here we are, John. I hope you like it," Ch said as the main entry slid open. I followed her inside and found a fully furnished and spacious apartment. The far wall immediately caught my eye as it was displaying a 3-meter-high by 12-meter-long high-resolution image of a tropical beach very like heels in the sand. Off over the ocean, I could see the glow of dawn approaching. The simulation went beyond the visual as I could smell the salt air and hear the distant roaring of the surf. Hidden fans were also causing breezes, which were synchronized to the waving palms in the image. To the right of the living space was a standard auto kitchen and eating area. Ch had never been one to spend a lot of time cooking, so I imagined the auto chef being the main food preparer. To the left of the living room was a comfortable-looking seating area. Beyond was a hallway likely leading to the apartment's sleeping areas. There was a man in the seating area. He was awake and seated, but currently off in virtual. His shell must have noted my attention and ended his session, and when he stood, I went to greet him. I noted that he appeared dressed for the day. Since it had only been a few hours since I had arrived on the asteroid, he was clearly an early riser. "This is my partner, Ramy Rahat," Ch said, introducing the man to Omu and me. I shook hands with the man. His shell was probably in its early 50s and near the same age as X's, but I got the sense that the personality inside was much older. "It is nice to meet you, John. Ch speaks often of you and of your early years together," Ramy said. "I should thank you for agreeing to rescue her from her jungle upbringing all those years ago," he added. I laughed. It had been a long, long time since those days. "You're welcome. But I don't think you really need to thank me. Ch would have surely escaped from that life on her own just as soon as she realized that she was free. I only accelerated the process slightly. Still, much of her personality is due to your actions and the decades you two spent together, he said. I could tell that Uxa was slightly embarrassed by the conversation and steered our discussion back to Ramy. I learned that he and I had actually met at a training class over 80 years ago. We were both in different shells at the time, but I was able to remember speaking with him occasionally during the week-long session. He had been an expert in power generation, and apparently that was still his specialty, as he was a team leader in the power generation systems on the asteroid. Finally, Uxe broke up our chat and explained that I needed to rest. Ramy apologized for keeping me and said that he would be going. He and Ux shared a hug and a kiss, and I saw that he had a small travel bag with him as he left the apartment. Is he traveling somewhere? Yes and no. He will be gone for a few days touring the fusion reactor field located on the asteroid's south polar area. After that, he is going to be staying with an old lover of his while you remain here. I figured that you might be more comfortable with just me and Omu as companions, Ux explained. I was too tired to fully comprehend the full implications of her statement. That confusion quickly disappeared as she led me to her bedroom suite's attached bathing area and began undressing. I noted that her petite older shell was still in great condition with no wrinkles or solar radiation damage. She must still follow the rigorous exercise and stretching routines which she had in the past. She finished and began to help me remove my clothing. Soon after being gently scrubbed in the hot water of the shower, we hugged more deeply and shared a long kiss. My young shell responded to her ministrations, and we were soon caressing each other more intimately throughout the air-dry cycle. She then led me to her large bed, where we further reacquainted ourselves. Twice, after our passions were sated, I lay spoon to her backside with my arms wrapped around her much smaller shell. She fit perfectly, and it was a great way to recover from the high G trip. Despite the half-century that had passed since our last get-together, I felt as close to her now as I always had. That her current partner was off somewhere while I lay here in their shared bed did not concern me greatly. Ux would never have done something deceitful, and she had reassured me beforehand that it was perfectly fine with the two of them. I also learned that the old lover who Ramy would be staying with had also been recently reshelled. I suspected that he was enjoying the novelty of a younger lover as much as Uxa was. Yes, it felt comfortable to be lying here beside my old partner. In the darkness of her bedroom, something about the back of her head caught my eye. I triggered the Smart Iris's enhancements and saw that Uxa's shell had rows of data transfer contacts lining the backside of her skull. She had an enhanced cranial interface. I'd heard of the modification, but had never seen the implants this closely. The upgraded interface allowed her to link her mind with artificial memories and processors as needed. Now I knew why her shell had seemed slightly off. The internal cranial hardware required that her skull be larger than normal. She had an enlarged head as compared to her body, and the proportions were slightly askew. As I thought about her upgrade, I realized that it made perfect sense for her. She was one of the brightest minds I had ever known, and her work had been near the cutting edge of technology for over a century and a half. The interface would allow her to retain every single thought and detail without the risks of memories fading. Humanity owed much of its hopes and current success to her intellect, inventions, and developments. My awe in my partner was brought back down to earth a notch when she started snoring lightly beside me. I gave her a tiny squeeze and let myself drift away to join her in slumber. I came awake hours later to find I was now alone in the soft bed. The door leading to the living space was ajar, and I could hear an ongoing discussion. I was able to make out Ux quietly talking with Omu. It sounded like they were getting reacquainted. I stretched deeply and decided that I felt pretty good. I checked my chrono display and found that it was almost noon. Time to get up. I made my way to the attached bathroom. After I spent a bit of time on the toilet getting my bowel movements reestablished from the nutrient packs I had consumed after our deceleration burn, I took a quick shower. As I used the dry cycle, I noticed a growl in my stomach. I would need real food soon. I saw that either Yux or Omu had prepared a fresh change of clothing in my size. Now that we were deep inside the asteroid complex, an emergency pressure suit was not required to be worn constantly, so my outfit was just a soft pair of utility trousers and a long-sleeve shirt. I noticed the shirt had 4 short loops attached to the back side, but didn't know why. There were no shoes, but the socks were traction sole and would do. "Good morning, John." Are you feeling better? Ux asked as I walked into the kitchen. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I answered. 2 rounds of love-making probably strained a few muscles that the fast space trip had left undamaged. Are you complaining? She asked with a look. Oh, hell no, I'm a lucky man, I expounded before wrapping her up in a tight hug. We ate lunch. My food was bland and designed to get my digestive system back to normal after my high G run. While we ate, Yux explained that she was taking time off while I was here. I asked how long that would be, and she was evasive, saying that we would talk about that after lunch. I finished my recovery gruel, but did sneak a fresh chocolate chip cookie for dessert. Next, the 3 of us settled into Ux's living room to have our first group talk. Before Uxe would explain the true reasons why she had requested me here, she demanded that I tell the full story of what had happened with me starting 9 years ago. I'd told the story enough over the past few weeks that it now came easier. Ux got the full, complete story, though, including all my anger and suspicions about Naomi. After I was done, she moved closer to me and just held me. Was he right, Omu? She asked the android. Omu did not hesitate. Yes, I have no direct knowledge of whether or not Naomi interfered with the subpresence's investigation into its actions. It would be logical to assume the interference did happen, however. Ux looked troubled at that, and I could tell she was deep in thought. After a few minutes of silence, she seemed to dismiss the matter. I had seen her do this before. She would put a problem out of her mind and let her hindbrain work on it for a few days or weeks. Then at a later time, she would have another go at the issue, usually with a solution in hand. Thank you for sharing the true complete story, John. I am sorry for the pain it must still cause you to discuss it, she said. I made motions to dismiss her concerns. I had told the tale enough now that the repetition and the passage of time were helping. One of the students who died, Dia Roshan, is now working here on Vesta. I have spoken with him, but of course he has no memories of either the training class or the accident which took his life, Ux stated. That's right. Jess had mentioned that Dia was working on Ganasium's project. That would have to be the Gambado project currently under construction here. He did say that he holds no ill will towards you, though. From what he was able to learn after he was reshelled, he considered his death simply an accident and bad luck. Next, she had me tell her of everything I had done since I had returned from the wilderness. I told her about my first week back in South Dakota. Yux had lived there enough with me that the story had her smiling. She was also amazed when I had explained the historical reenactment camp that Chelsea Iberia was operating nearby. She said that we would have to check out one of the episodes when it was transmitted here. She also complimented Omu for having the foresight to hire Angelina to see to my intimate needs after I had been brought back. I continued telling her of my recent activities and had gotten to the part about going to the Forbin complex when she interrupted. Forbin? You were there, John? She asked, clearly surprised. Yes, it was quite an experience. I am still both impressed and uncomfortable about what I saw there. More dinosaur, I explained. Why are you surprised? It's an interesting coincidence. I'll explain further later, she evaded. Please continue. I continued on with my story and covered my meeting Sahun and the night spent in the bunker, where I confessed all to Jess and where we waited out the news of the Interstellar interloper. I then talked about my recent vacation to Heels and my trip to Africa to meet my daughter. This finished off my recent history, and now it was Yux's turn. First, let's discuss the recent news, which is related to one of the reasons I asked that you come to Vesta. Her face turned blank for a moment as she accessed her virtual menu. The apartment's display wall switched from showing the jungle scenery to displaying a huge three-dimensional map of our solar system. As the display zoomed out and rotated to show our nearest interstellar neighbors, Ux explained what I was looking at. Almost 6 years ago, the Argus Array detected an event out in interstellar space near the assemblage Arc ship's projected approach vector. Have you heard of this? She asked. I nodded and she continued. It was later determined to be some form of matter-antimatter explosions on or very near the enemy Arc ship. As you may have already been told, it is likely that the event was an attack on the Arc vessel by some other element, with the Hemru being the most likely suspects. The display zoomed in on the area of space where the detection was made. The event occurred approximately 8.85 light-years away from Sol system. As you can see, there were multiple detections made over a period of 3 days. We recently learned that the explosions occurred over a period of 6 days. In its initial detection, the Argus array either missed the others or our almost head-on viewpoint limited the array's detection abilities. The display zoomed back out to include our sun once again. A dashed line appeared which was surrounded by a narrow cone. Although we don't know the result of the explosions we detected, we were able to use them to accurately fix the location and speed of our enemy. Thus, we have now narrowed down the AAV, or assemblage approach vector, much more precisely than our previous estimates allowed. I was excited. If we knew the course of our enemy with enough precision, we might be able to act against it in some form before they arrive instead of waiting until they pass. Uxie continued. 5 days ago, the Argus array began receiving transmissions from Averill. The display changed back to showing the location of the previous detections and magnified in closer so the multiple detections filled the wall. The detections of the explosions became much more defined with multiple separate incidents being shown along a clear vector path. The transmission explained that Averill's trailing detection array had also detected the explosions at the enemy arc. However, with it being nearly 6 light-years distant from Sol and with its course leaving Earth being perpendicular to the AAV, Averill's vantage point was far enough offset from the Argus array detections to record the individual explosions far more precisely. Over a 6-day period, Averill's array detected 7 distinct and separate matter-antimatter explosion events. The data shown on the projection changed. Precise location coordinates for each explosion event were added to the enlarged map. Also, the dashed line indicating the course of the assemblage arc was adjusted slightly, and the display showing the estimated speed of the arc was revised to a more precise 7.496% of light speed. So combining the data from the previous Argus array detection and the newer data just received from Averill, we now know very precisely the course and speed of our enemy. We also know that it was attacked at least 7 times by matter-antimatter weapons, although we do not know how successful those attacks were, Ux said. Do we now have enough data on the assemblage course and speed to launch an interception attack? Or worse? Handwaises. Osomowu answered instead of Ux. Possibly, John. Since the new data arrived from Averill, Praxia AI has been running near-constant simulations on various attack scenarios. It has determined that with the new data, a head-to-head attack at some distance from Sol might now be possible. The original risks with such an attack remain, however, the android explained. I recalled from our planning sessions over a century ago the problems involved with trying to attack the assemblage arc before its passage through Sol system. The first was how to track and engage a target that was heading directly towards you at 7.5% of light speed. Compounding that problem was that we would want to attack the arc as far away from Sol as possible. This meant that we would have to use very fast attacking missiles. The missile's speed combined with the arc's approach speed meant even higher closure speeds, which further reduced the time available to detect and maneuver towards our enemy. We also didn't currently have the technology to construct a missile which could slow down and wait for the arc and then attack it as it passed. That would require far too much energy or make the missile so large that it would easily be detected. Those problems and others meant that our attack would be like firing a bullet against an incoming bullet, only many orders of magnitude more complex. Up until now, we did not know where the bullet would be coming from. With the new data, we did. Just maybe we could now aim our bullet where we needed to go to have a chance. Another option was to launch a spread of scouting probes to track the assemblage arc and relay back targeting data to Sol to guide follow-on missiles. The downside to that was that the assemblage would likely detect the scouts or their transmission and know that an attack was imminent. This would allow it to take measures, both defensive and offensive. The defensive measures could involve a screen of some sort to intercept our interceptors, or the enemy could maneuver the arc out of the way of our attack. We were not sure of its capabilities to diverge from its course. It also might have leading scouts of its own who were much more maneuverable than the main arc itself. The offensive possibilities of our enemy were even more frightening. The assemblage would know from our early attack that the Earth was no longer under its authority. Instead of passing through Sol's system and benignly transmitting its cargo of stored mine data, it could instead do a bombing run and target everything of value. In fact, it would be forced to do so or else risk a stern chase attack launched from Sol's system, similar to the one it had endured from the Hemru nearly 6 years ago. The AI advisory group had dreamed up many frightful scenarios over the years regarding an offensive acting enemy. More than a few had resulted in humanity's extinction. Some even sterilized the entire system of biological life. With humanity now out in the solar system and spreading to other stars, it was improbable that we would become extinct again. But I liked the Earth and did not want to see it destroyed again. So, because of the continuing risk, the current consensus of the AI advisory group remains to not attempt a distant preemptive attack on the assemblage arc. However, the refinement of its course and speed will be used to improve our follow-on attack after the arc passes Sol's system. For Averill's likely sacrifice, we now have much higher chances of these attacks succeeding, Omu continued. I mulled over the android's statement for a moment before I caught up to the last part of her statement. Sacrifice? What do you mean by that? Ux answered instead of Omu. By transmitting its detection data to Sol system, Averill likely compromised the success of its own mission. Ganacium has run extensive simulations, and the results are not favorable. Why? I asked. Averill will undoubtedly have lost both its trailing detection array and its leading graphene impact shields. It can survive without the detection array, but the impact shields are mandatory and would have to be recreated. The resources needed to do that, plus the positron energy used to send the interstellar transmission to Earth in the first place, make it likely that the vessel will not have enough energy reserves to properly decelerate at Tau Ceti, she explained somberly. I considered the implications of her statement. It must have been a hard choice for them to make, I said. It would have been your choice, John, Omu said, startling me. I have simulated the autopilot action chains which would have occurred on Averill after the detection was made. I am certain the limited intelligence awareness on board would have awakened your stored mind data copy into an emergency biological shell and forced you to make the decision. That's right. I had sent a copy of myself on that mission, and the mission rules existing at that time would have had that copy be the ultimate decision-maker. I sighed and leaned forward to rub my temples. Ux leaned over and hugged me to her. Well, let's hope I made the right decision, I said. It may be that I can put your mind at ease regarding that, Ux said. My true reason for asking you to come to Vesta was to discuss research I have been focusing on since the first detections from 5 years ago were made. Now, with the added data from Averill, I am even more determined for this research to succeed. You might be able to help, Ux said. I looked at her questioningly, but she deferred the topic by saying that she would explain later. Omu, did you receive any further messages from Naomi regarding the transmission from Averill? I asked the android. Only that Naomi agrees with the AI advisory group on the impracticality of preemptively attacking the assemblage before they enter the solar system, Omu replied. Naomi did add the caveat that it may reconsider the matter if new technology should arise, making the attack odds more successful. I felt Ux tense at the task. Omayu continued. I am also aware that now that the enemy's course and speed can be accurately plotted, the AI advisory group is considering Praxia AI's plans to alter the follow-on attack on the enemy arc. Oh, how so? I asked. By basing our attacking weaponry in orbits which place them closer to the assemblage approach vector. Our standoff weaponry can now be orbited so their orbits would coincide with the approach and departure vectors, which would reduce interception times. Additionally, static mines are now a possibility. The modifications might also allow for the contingency of attacking before the arc arrives if a reason should present itself, Omu explained. I extrapolated her statement as meaning, if the assemblage did learn of our betrayal and switch to attacking the Earth, our weaponry would be in a position to launch an early deterrent attack. If that came to pass, we would also need to begin evacuating as many humans as we could from the Earth. That thought reminded me that it had been a few decades since I had studied humanity's plans for the assemblage's arrival. I would have to bring myself back up to date soon on those. Now you know the new information we possess regarding the approach of the assemblage, John. How about we take a short trip and do a little sightseeing? We can view the current progress on the Gambado and also check out a little something I've been working on that might help our chances against the enemy, Ux said. The way she said the last told me that this something was the main reason why I had been urged to come here. She was being very secretive about it still. I hoped that this would end shortly. "Will Omu be joining us?" I asked. "Of course. I want her input on my project as well," she replied. Interesting. I realized that Uxe had probably already picked up from Omu's comments that there had been changes with the android, emancipation being one of the biggest. If not, I would have to consider bringing her up to date. "All right, let's go take a look," I said as I climbed to my feet.